Well, good evening, everybody. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we are meeting today and pay my respect to elders past, present and those emerging. Welcome to all those members who've come along. Thank you for coming along. It also always makes it interesting when we've got more people in the gallery. I will now declare our public forum component open, and we hold that public forum today to hear from community members who have registered to speak on items before the council meeting tonight. And I would ask that the community listen to those speakers and in silence and with respect. Also want to remind speakers and indeed everybody here that this forum is webcast, and that does mean that your image and what you say is broadcast. And that does mean that you are liable for defamation and other things should you say statements that might be defaming. Council will not be responsible for your actions. Please make sure your mobile phones are off or on silent, and I would ask you to remain seated while the forum is underway. So first of all, I'll ask the staff if we have any conflicts of interest. I don't believe there are any. I will remind the speakers, I think a number of actually regular speakers, which is great, that your presentation is live streamed and that you have 3 minutes to address the council. The first of those speakers we have is Joy Cooper around the monthly financial report. Joy, good to see you again.
Administrator Hart, you told us several times the financial crisis at the Central Coast Council is well and truly over. You've even set up a new fund to fast-track repayments of emergency loans you negotiated in 2020. You did quite a bit of negotiating in 2020, 2021, when you were acting CEO, including being at the table during executive meetings that discussed and decided which of the council's land assets would be cashed in. At first, you and Interim Administrator Dick Person told us you needed to sell $40 million of assets. Then the figure became $50 million, and then it grew to $60 million. It's now been some months since you declared that the $60 million asset sale target has been passed. Why then are you continuing to sell our assets? According to a local real estate agent, 82 and 84 Yarram Road, Bensville, another 2,062 square metres of council land, our land, is to be sold at auction in December. I suppose we should be thankful that the auction is the method of sale being used this time. It's a shame that it wasn't the preferred method for the sale when Warner Business Park and Thompson Vale Road, Doyleson were sold. You may have managed your $60 million sale target a bit earlier than you did when the property market was red hot, but you were even offering delayed settlements. I think the community needs an explanation as to why, if the Central Coast Council is no longer facing financial ruin, you need to keep selling our assets. What will you be doing with the proceeds from the sale of the land at Bensville? Will it be used to pay off the additional debt entered into with the top-tier bank when the New South Wales government turned its back on the ratepayers and the residents of the Central Coast and refused to clean up the mess it created amalgamating our councils? And what's the interest rate being paid on the loans, by the way? I didn't see that in the monthly financial report. Why, as you move to privatising the Gosford waterfront, are you determined to sell off the Gosford Council Chamber and the extensive Man Street land earmarked for the community's long-promised performing arts and cultural precinct? You said council will give its prime waterfront land over to a development corporation so the state government can spend $300 million and then hand the whole lot to a private developer. Do you expect us to believe that the concrete amphitheatre and the Guggenheim-like building sitting out over the water will end up being the creative and performing arts infrastructure this region has been waiting for decades? What is the value of the waterfront land that will be given away? 300 million? I didn't see that in the monthly financial report. When will the community be given the comprehensive report on what assets remain for sale, their value, when they will be sold, and most importantly, why are you doing this? Also, as an end note, why is the monthly report being changed 2 hours before this council meeting?
Thank you, Joy. The next speaker is Peter Francis.
Who incurred the death, Rick? You're making the liability ours? Not meant to. Answer. People ask you.
I think there were some signs up there. This is not a public meeting. It is a meeting in.
You don't make the rules, mate. It's a public forum.
The rules are very clear.
What rules are they? Rules of authority.
Well,
What authority?
I think we'll try to listen to Mr. Francis and welcome Mr. Francis. Have a go.
You're good at it, mate. You're really good at it.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favour of item 2.1, the planning proposal at 285 to 325 Pacific Highway, Lake Munmora. As this project director, I speak on behalf of 3 highly quality developers, Rose Group, Alder Properties and Urban Villager, who are in attendance tonight, and their planners, BRS. We acknowledge and support the council report. We can attest to the appropriately rigorous process we have undertaken these past 2.5 years in terms of various environmental and engineering studies, time and resources to prepare the rezoning planning proposal. The proposed residential use with adjacent environmental protection and recreation facilities has been designed collaboratively by the 3 developers to deliver a sustainable development that provides, firstly, social benefits consistent with Central Coast Council's Community Strategic Plan framework, and secondly, job-creating economic benefits for the community, its residents and businesses. The social benefits that will be realised by supporting the proposal are notable. The project will deliver much-needed housing supply. The addition of 300 new dwellings will be provided at an affordable price point suitable for first home buyers and downsizers. The investment principles of some of the developers will see low environmental impact dwellings constructed and at least 20% of the stock retained on a build-to-rent model specifically designed to cater for the needs of key workers and people with disabilities. The integration of recreation and conservation areas will create an environment that promotes healthy living and active lifestyles for both new and current residents of the area. The proposed collector road will remove traffic from the Pacific Highway and improve community safety for existing and new residents heading to the school precincts and the shopping centre. A 3,000 square metre park and internal footpaths will be integrated and connected to the existing networks of parks, shared cycles and pedestrian paths. Furthermore, this fully privately funded and delivered state and local road pedestrian and recreation infrastructure will be delivered in advance of the first residents arriving to build their homes. Secondly, the independent economic review was conducted by Remplan economists, and it shows that the proposal will deliver an investment of $285 million. And over a brief 5-year construction period will add $871 million to the local economy, supporting 425 construction and ancillary community jobs. Annually thereafter, the residential community will inject $380 million into the Central Coast economy and support 775 jobs via the new residents. The proposal has an inherent logic. The site is an infill project between 2 existing residential estates and adjoining the Woolworths and Education precincts at Carter's Road. The proposal is comprehensively aligned to the community needs and delivers much needed infrastructure without burden to council or the community. In fact, the project will have a net contribution with new residents generating rates of over $700,000 per annum towards city operations. As I said, construction will support 425 jobs and new residents' incomes will support 775 jobs annually in perpetuity. In summary, the proposal delivers balanced environmental, social and economic outcomes for the current and future generations of the Lake Marmora and the city area. And we seek the approval of the planning proposal as tabled.
Thank you, Mr Francis. And our third speaker is Helen Foster. Welcome, Helen.
Hello, my name is Helen Foster and I live in Chisholm Avenue, Lake Marmora. I'm here to speak against part of the development of the proposal development on 285 to 325 Pacific Highway, Lake Marmora. What I'm objecting to is the access road going through Chisholm Avenue. The main traffic flowing through Chisholm Avenue with an estimated increase of 2,200 vehicles per trip per day. This increase will have a significant impact on residents of Chisholm Avenue, Kimera Road and Deakin Avenue. The extra traffic will have an impact on house value, with resale being lower priced. It will impact the health and wellbeing of current residents. It will cause stress, anxiety and mental health. We're a quiet street where we are neighbourhood friendly and enjoy the peace and harmony of the natural bushland surrounding us. When we built or bought here, we have had a green corridor surrounding us. This was the reason why I built here over 30 years ago. Kimera Road and Deakin Avenue also need to be upgraded, as the traffic will flow through their street when traffic is queued up at the intersection to Tall Timbers Road. What does the upgrade to the road consist of? On rainy days when the road has deep water in the gutter in front of our homes, extra traffic will cause erosion of the road. A footpath doesn't compensate for the change of a quiet street to a main busy road and will not guarantee the safety of children crossing the street to catch a school bus. The overhead power lines that run across the road does not allow high trucks to pass through. Therefore, trucks with housing frames and building products may find it difficult to drive through. On many occasions, they have been knocked down with trucks trying to pass through. The Greater Lake Marmora Structural Plan indicates that the road was going to be built behind Deakin Avenue, which is linked to Carter's Road, and this plan is more viable. It doesn't affect any existing residents. Finishing my statement, as stated, I object to the road going through Chisholm Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public speakers for this evening. So I will now declare the public forum closed and we will recommence the council meeting proper at
The Community Strategic Plan is the community's vision for the Central Coast for the next 10 years. It's called One Central Coast because this is the first plan for the whole of the Central Coast. We are one region, one council and one community. We live in a special place here on the coast, one in which we want all members of our community to feel valued and have access to a range of opportunities to participate in the richness of community life. And every one of us can play a part in bringing this community vision to life.
If people feel part of a community in some way, they'll give without probably even knowing they're doing it.
I wanted to restore this building and get it back to what it was. It was the jewel of the crown, and I wanted to get it back to that. Making a difference. I guess that's what we're really here for.
The smile on the faces when they see these engines and that bus coming around, they just love it.
If you're following what makes you happy and excited and interested, then you're definitely going to live a life that you will be thankful to have lived.
At the end of the day, we just had a good idea. We needed the support of many people to turn that great idea into a sustainable venture. My name's Tim Silverwood. I grew up on the Central Coast. It wasn't until I got a bit older and started travelling around the world I realised that what we had was so special because people don't always treat the environment as well as we do here on the Central Coast. Our programs have focused on going into schools and running events in communities. We also have a huge global online audience. One man cannot solve these big global problems. It's going to take a tribe of people coming together to solve them. It's a really amazing and rewarding journey in spreading this message around the world.
I've always been on the coast and I've loved the coast. About 6 years ago, I bought the Chapman building. I got the opportunity, I saw that it was for sale and I stood back on the car park up there and a village central and I looked down and, I could just feel this was the place to be. I could just see what the town was. There's always these little niches that are, going back and forth and, I guess it's an obsession for all of us because we saw what Wyong was like and it's getting it to a place where, we're proud to say, we're from Wyong. Like it's become a real proud place to be.
My name's Chris Wallace. Myself and my wife, we own Community Fire Education and the Fun Engine. We educate the community in a different way. We teach people what to do in case of fire. One of the biggest things is our education bus. What we do, we go out to different fates, festivals, wherever we can go. When we do the bus sometimes, we get 2,000 through that bus. I just enjoy communicating and getting out there and just educating in a different way.
I'm Meredith Gilmore. I've lived on the coast since 2000, originally from Sydney. Chose the coast because it's close to Sydney, but it's got that more laid back kind of thing that I like. I like living in regional areas. I started visual art in my 40s. It's just so different from what I ever thought that I'd ever do, and it is what led me into thinking it would be great to talk to people in the arts on the radio. So I started doing some shows, particularly a program called Coast Arts, which was a new show, and I reached out into the community because I'm an artist as well. And I just felt like there was a lot of scope on the radio to do interviews with artists and poets and writers, and that's been going now for over 7 years.
My name is Shauna O'Brien. I am from the Central Coast of New South Wales on Dark and Young land, and I'm a dancer. As an Indigenous dancer, we're very inspired by the environment and where we come from, all of the trees, the way that they curve around all of the rocks and the sea faces, the beautiful water, the fresh air, and that plays a huge part in the creative process. I was lucky enough to study at NASA Dance College, which was a super incredible experience, and the facilities, the studios are really beautiful, the staff are incredible, and I feel very privileged to have had that opportunity. Through volunteering, I was able to meet a bunch of really great other young people in the community that are really passionate about helping other people, and that's a way of taking something that I'm very passionate about and sharing that with other people. No matter where I go to work or if I have to spend a lot of time in Sydney, I always come back to the Central Coast because it feels like home and it helps rejuvenate me.
One of the things about the Central Coast I've noticed as well, which is people are so helpful to each other. They collaborate, they are interested in going to each other's exhibitions, not just to see what people are doing, but so that there are people there. And you've got to be competitive, but you don't have to always be competitive with each other.
If you're in a position to make a difference, I guess you're obliged to make that difference, really. Just happy to, give it all I could, and it became, a local icon and a bustling place to be.
I'm Ace Buchan. I'm a professional surfer from the Central Coast. Growing up on the Central Coast was a dream for a young kid that loved the ocean as much as I did and had this amazing playground to go and explore. To kind of have the chance to wake up and, you know, watch the sunrise, pre-dawn light kind of turn into those beautiful blue and pink hues. Nature, you know, in the way that it was kind of intended is really special. You know, the beaches and the space that we have on the Central Coast has given me a lot of clarity, and it's kept me grounded. It's kept my keel upright when things have gone a little bit crazy in my life, and being able to glide along the face of a moving piece of ocean that's been generated hundreds of thousands of miles away, it's a feeling like no other. One of the things I really love about the Central Coast is that there are these beautiful kind of swathes of land that have been declared national parks, and as a child I was lucky enough to start experiencing that with my parents. To now go and do that with my kids is really special. Being able to kind of walk through the bush and not see anyone else and just kind of listen to the sounds and, you know, sometimes just drop the surfboards and go exploring, I feel pretty lucky to have access to. For tens of thousands of years, people have inhabited this land and looked after it and cared for it, and we need to respect this beautiful playground that we've been lucky enough to call home. It's something pretty special.
everybody. And I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the 22nd of November 2022 Central Coast Council Ordinary Meeting. I now declare the meeting open, but I would like to remind all present, while this is not a public meeting, it is a meeting in front of the public. It is a meeting for the purposes of council decision making, and I ask those members of the public present to not interject in that process. So once again, I remind people that the meeting is being webcast, and I remind those that your image and what you say is recorded. Please stay seated at all times and comply with the requirements of our COVID safe plan. Now, as is usual, so it's a warm welcome to everybody in the gallery, and also a very special welcome to Marissa Racamorafora, wherever she is. There she is. So she's a member of our executive team, and she started here on Monday. So I want to acknowledge and express my support for the communities across New South Wales who are being impacted by the current floods. The Central Coast knows all too well how challenging flood emergencies are on the community, so my thoughts are with the communities and councils dealing with those natural disasters, and I hope for their quick and full recovery. This month, I also met with the Federal Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government, Catherine King, alongside Council's directors and the Federal Member for Robertson, Dr Gordon Reid, and they confirmed the $40 million funding from the Federal Government for the Central Coast, which supports road and sporting facilities upgrade. I enjoyed touring the various play spaces and sporting facilities around Avoca Beach, Kincumber and Saratoga, alongside the Minister and Dr Reid. I also got to catch up with representatives from the Free Villages Community Group who have been doing some great work in their local communities by sourcing funding for various community projects that they are passionate about. We're actually relatively and really lucky here on the Central Coast, as we have very good working relationships with the local politicians across both sides of politics. Being blunt, we have a good bunch of pollies here, and I'm pleased their interests and focuses are on improving the Central Coast region. Also this month, the Council unveiled the completion of a significant project, which is the new landfill cell at Buttonderry Waste Management Facility. It was great to be on site with Council staff to officially open the new $9 million cell, which will meet the community's waste disposal needs for approximately the next 4.5 years. This landfill cell has a total airspace of 820,000 cubic metres, which is the equivalent of 430 Olympic swimming pools. However, the actual best outcome we can hope for is that this cell will never actually be filled. Reducing waste sent to landfill is an important action we can all contribute to, and is part of Council's waste resource management strategy. Despite the many challenges faced during the project, including COVID-19, wet weather and 2 significant natural disaster events, Council's team successfully delivered the project on time and on budget. The improved weather conditions over the last month has allowed Council's road crews to deliver longer-term road repairs, what's known colloquially as heavy patching, where a whole section of road is treated to repair and prevent potholes and road damage. Council crews have completed over 30,000 square metres of heavy patching on our roads, which is equivalent to the size of 19 football fields. It's been great that the crews have been able to begin or complete some high priority heavy patching works in Woy Woy, Somersby, Batto Bay, Davistown, Toukley, Tuggerawong and Jillaby, while further works are scheduled at Gosford and Tumbiumbi. Community events, we've had a number of those. There's been a hive of activity lately with the events season in full swing. And these include the Lakes Festival at the entrance, Surf Sounds Beachside Festival at Umina Beach, Sunset Social and Latin on the lake at Long Jetty, the Arts and Crafts Fair at Toukley, the Sustainable Futures Festival at Mingara, which has some very special guests including Dr. Carl. This in particular was a great event with over 500 school children attending and 2,000 in total. There's more to come throughout the summer, including social spaces created events, across the coast in December, New Year's Eve at the entrance, Australia Day 2023 in Gosford, Love Lanes in Wyong early next year, and there's more. So to find out what's happening on the coast, head to Council's events page on the website. Women's sport, that's topical at the moment. I'd like to comment on the buzz around women's sport at the moment and how this is presenting here on the coast. I was at the Matildas game recently in Gosford, and the number of young children there, particularly young girls, was just absolutely wonderful. The announcement of the Central Coast Mariners A-League women's team has also been fantastic news for women's sport, and this is actually right in step with what's happening internationally. I happened to be briefly in New Zealand last week on a family matter, and it was great to see the Rugby World Cup in Auckland attracting higher rates of attendance of 44,000 people than the male All Blacks did. It's very encouraging for young women and girls here on the coast that pathways to be involved in high-level sport are emerging at a rapid rate. I also have to congratulate the Council's Marketing and Tourism Team Director Mel Smith's team, who won silver at the 2022 New South Wales Tourism Awards held at Luna Park in Sydney last week. The Silver Local Government Award for Tourism celebrates the outstanding innovation and resilience of our region's tourism industry and the progressive steps Council is taking to continually develop and strengthen the Central Coast visitor economy. I would like to remind community members up there at the moment that the executive and myself will be available for a chat and a cup of tea afterwards, and I would love that you actually remain quiet for the rest of the meeting so we can have a good conversation afterwards over a cup of tea or coffee. If you would like to join me, feel free to come along after that. So we'll now move on to item 1.1, which disclosures of interest. I have no interest to disclose. I don't believe any of the other council staff have. So we will now resolve the resolution as shown on the screen. Item 1.2, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. I have looked at the minutes and read them. I can attain that they are correct, so I would now resolve the resolutions that are shown on the screen. Item 1.3, notice of intention to deal with matters in closed session. There are no matters to deal with in closed session, so I will now resolve that as shown on the screen. Now, as the Director of Environment and Planning, Dr. Alice Howe, who is on the screen there, is joining us remotely tonight. She's suffering very badly from some bug. It doesn't have to be, it's not bug, but it is something that we're grateful for that she is coming in online. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to resolve to consider the agenda in the following manner. So you will be able to read those, but I'll just read them out. So we will consider the agenda in the following order. Items 2.1, 2.2, 2.5, 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, 2.3, 2.7, 2.9, 210, 211, 212, 214, 215, 216, 213, 208, 217, 218, 219, 220 and 221. And for the sake of clarity, these items will be recorded in the minutes in their published agenda sequence. I see that this will be a little bit hard to follow, but it is to try and assist Dr. Howe. So item 2.1 we'll move on to, which is the monthly finance report for October 2022. And I'll now ask the Chief Executive just to talk to that paper.
Thank you. I'll talk to the monthly finance report and the investment report. That's the next item. But I'd just like to make a few comments in response to the questions and points raised by Ms. Cooper earlier on. And unfortunately, we didn't have the notes as to what she was going to talk about beforehand, so I won't be able to answer all the matters that were raised, but I'll provide some points to those that I can. In terms of the Gosford waterfront and the concept of putting that land into a special purpose vehicle to develop that, the intention would be that that land would go into that vehicle, there would be development, and there would be a greater amount of what we would call parkland or public domain left over after that than was originally there in the first place. It's under consultation at the moment, and we're getting significant consultation as I said, it's currently under significant amount of community consultation at the moment, and we've received feedback, as I understand it, from thousands of people. In terms of the question Ms Cooper raised about why was the table in the report changed, it was noticed that the report showing the capital expenditure to date was the capital expenditure that was current at the date of the publication of the report, whereas this is a report that is current to the 30th of October. So that was slightly higher because it showed some expenditure in November. So we've reissued the report only. The only change is the numbers in the capital expenditure report, which now go to the expenditure at the end of October. In terms of the sale of assets, the sale of assets were determined in 2021. A list was determined after significant public consultation. No items have been added to the list. The items that Ms Cooper raised about in Bensville are residential lots, lots that are zoned as residential, and they are too small to be used as viable public housing spaces, and therefore they're surplus to council use, and it's subject to that resolution of council from 2021. In terms of the interest rates on the loans, I don't have those available in front of me at the moment, but those loans reset after 3 years, so that will be in November and December of next year, and it's highly likely on current trends that those interest rates will raise significantly. And there's a report later in the agenda that shows that council, due to some of the difficult decisions we've had to make, have generated enough cash and a significant amount of excess cash, and we'll be paying those loans down significantly in December next year when they reset. So that's just in response to some of those issues that were raised by the first speaker on tonight's public forum. In terms of the monthly results, we ran a very slight deficit of $162,000, which was better than the budgeted estimate, which was a deficit of $2.4 million for the month. This gives a surplus of $10.8 million for the first 4 months of the year. This continues the trend of council performing a little better than budget, but not as strongly as last year when there really were extreme cost control measures in place in the depths of that financial crisis that the organisation found itself in. The cash has remained steady at $677 million, assisted by the lower than budgeted capital expenditure, which is $40 million compared to the budgeted amount of $51 million. Importantly, the water fund now has positive unrestricted funds for the first time since the financial crisis was highlighted. And after folding drainage into general fund, all council funds now have positive unrestricted cash. External borrowing stayed flat at $307 million, and overall, a continuation of the steady progress that we've seen over the past 12 months is reflected in the monthly financials.
Thank you, Mr Farmer. Again, it's showing that the council is performing well and is right on track. And as Mr Farmer said, there's had to be, unfortunately, just a slight change to the paper, but these little gremlins do creep in from time to time. Now, I will now resolve for the council to adopt the monthly financial report for October 2022, item 2.1. So we'll make that as a decision of council. Mr Farmer has already spoken to the investment report, item 2.2. And again, the key point to note there is that in terms of the unrestricted cash, we have quite a bit of unrestricted cash at the present time. And I think a later paper that Mr Farmer will talk to will show you what we plan to do with that. But it's also very important to note that the fact is that, that the drainage fund is the only one that is in deficit now, and that will continue to remain in deficit, but that since in 3 years, or a bit over 3 years' time, that will become part of the general fund, so that will be wrapped up into that number. So with that, I will now resolve to adopt those resolutions for item 2.2, the investment report as shown on the screen. We now move to item 2.4, which is the Key Enabling Projects Prospectus for 2022. And this is great to see that we're actually moving into talking about positive things moving forward and no longer talking about the negative things. So, Mr. Farmer, you might like to talk about some of the exciting things we may have in store for us.
The Key Enabling Projects Prospectus before Council tonight identifies 12 significant projects that would benefit from funding by state or federal governments over the next 3 to 5 years. These projects include the Gosford Waterfront Revitalisation, which aims to assist in transforming Gosford into a principal city we can all be proud of, to offer higher services in terms of education, health and employment. Upgrades of water and sewer and transport infrastructure to support the growing population, and important environmental improvement works on Tuggerah Lakes. With the state election due in March 2023, it's timely that Council advocate for priority investment projects that will benefit the coast residents for generations to come. We will, subject to Council supporting this, we'll provide the prospectus to the major parties and to each candidate who applies for election at the state elections.
Thanks, Mr. Farmer. Look, it would be helpful if we could just have some quiet. There are a number of people here who would like to listen to some of the comments and so on, so I would appreciate if there could be some quietness to it. So I think there are some exciting things, and as I said, it's timely that we're putting that out when there is a state election in March next year, because in Australian politics, there are a lot of promises made during this forthcoming period, and we would hope that we might be the recipient of some of those promises. So with that, I'm going to move the resolution to endorse the Key Enabling Projects Prospectus for 2022 as shown on the screen. Item 2.5, which is the 2022-2023 Quarter 1 review. Mr. Farmer, please, can we have some quiet?
The quarterly review this quarterly review reviews Council's progress against the operational plan and budget. The September quarter was characterised by extremely severe rainfall and major flood events. This drew considerable focus from the organisation both in road repairs and disaster management and recovery activities. Of the 153 activities in the operational plan, 8 are completed, 126 are on track, 15 are delayed, 3 have not yet commenced and 1 is being closed. From a budget perspective, we are proposing adjustments which slightly improve the projected surplus from $9.8 million to $11.5 million. And that's consistent with the current better than estimated operating performance that the organisation is achieving.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. And again, it just demonstrates how things are progressing. There is one small thing in there, it's a detail, but from someone like myself, I take a keen interest in it. In the monthly reporting process, the quarterly reporting process, we are required by the Local Government Act, we are required to actually bring all our income up front. So that means all the rates income comes in up front, which means you're running the current expenditure, debiting that against that income, which does make the surplus look a lot bigger than it actually is. So that is a quirk, because most councils only produce financial results on a quarterly basis, and that means you're always looking in the rear vision mirror, and it's possibly one of the reasons why the previous council got into problems, because So something that I've been talking to some of the people about trying to sort of address that. But with that, thank you, Mr. Farmer. We will now move to adopt the resolution that is shown on the screen. Now, item 2.6 is the establishment of new internal restrictions and update of restricted funds policy. Now, I think this is a pretty exciting thing, Mr. Farmer, so I would like you to explain it very briefly to those who can listen.
Sure. Under Council's newly adopted financial strategy identifies a target of unrestricted funds of between 3 and 10% of turnover for each fund. Council's general fund currently has above this level of cash, driven by stronger financial performance last year, and as Ms. Cooper has mentioned, the proceeds of asset sales to date. Council's required in November and December 2020 to take out emergency loans of $150 million. It also is required to run significant surpluses each year over a 10-year period to repay the loans on current projections. However, due to this accretion of cash, it's proposed to set aside $50 million of Council's current unrestricted funds balance into a restricted asset, which will then be used to pay down a portion of these loans early when they reset in November or December next year. This will sustainably free up cash flow to direct into service areas of identified need. It's also proposed to establish a future projects reserve. This can be built up from financial outperformance and then directed to appropriate and identified projects as determined by the Council of the day.
Can we please let people speak?
It is proposed to direct $5 million of this as a result of the strong financial performance in the last financial year. This report proposes establishing these internally restricted funds and then transferring those funds as mentioned into them.
Thank you, Mr Farmer. So that partially answers one of Ms Cooper's questions when she said that where was the money going? Well, some of it is going to be held back for early debt repayment. And the intention of that is to allow, if we can repay the debt earlier, then it does free up the elected body when one returns in 2024. It will allow that elected body to have some money to, in other words, be able to allocate out to the community. Otherwise, it will be austerity measures. So I'm delighted now to be able to pass and establish those new two restricted funds. So I will move those resolutions for item 2.6 as shown on the screen. And we will now move to item 2.3, which is the annual report for 2021-22. And Ms Howe on the screen is now going to talk to that. Good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Some of us are trying to listen to this. Can somebody listen to this, please?
The annual report provides progress with its commitments for the 21-22 financial year. Slide 2, please.
How long has that been up for public scrutiny?
Slide 2, please.
Where do you define rigour?
The information in the annual report includes information about the Central Coast itself, Council's performance against its 21-22 operational plan, and other specific information that's required under legislation. Next slide, please. During the year, Council faced significant challenges due to the pandemic, to the extensive wet weather conditions that we've been experiencing, to the supply chain issues that have been felt across the economy, and significant difficulties recruiting skilled and qualified staff. Next slide, please. The challenges that we experienced have led to the delay of 15 actions, while a further 10 actions have been incorporated into this year's operational plan. 2 inactive actions were incorporated into completed actions. Next slide, please. The key achievements last year included recognition of the Central Coast as one of the first regions in Australia to receive Eco Destination certification, the success of the events that we were able to hold once COVID restrictions were lifted, and we also consolidated the former Wyong and Gosford planning instruments, as well as a range of other strategic documents. Next slide, please. Council worked hard to deliver its capital work program amongst the wet weather. Significant projects that were delivered included the Woy Woy Town Centre Walk, play spaces at Gwandolin, Greenpoint, north of Oka and Mardi, the next stage of the Tuggerawong Shared Path, and a number of road upgrades. Next slide, please. The annual report does not yet contain audited financial statements, as along with many other councils in New South Wales, these are still being prepared. They'll be included as an addendum to the council report once finalised. The unaudited financial results were reported to council in September, at which time council showed a surplus of 47 million in council's operating result, which was about 118 million improvement on the previous year. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. I think the numbers and the results that have been pointed out by Dr. Howe clearly tell the tale. I know there was some concern that the financials are not attached to the annual report. Now, the reason that is simple, that the legislation says we must produce an annual report by a certain time frame, which we've had to comply with. We did submit, as Dr. Howe said, the financials to Audit New South Wales back in September. I think it was about the 27th of September, and we were in the top 3% of councils in terms of timeframes of getting our numbers into Audit New South Wales. Audit New South Wales did ask us to request if you like, an extension to the time frame because they were still requiring some times to actually match some of the asset valuations between two sets of data. So that's the reason why the financials are in there, is because Audit New South Wales asked us to apply to Office of Local Government to get an extension, which we got, and approximately 50% of all councils have had to, for similar reasons, not necessarily exactly the same, but for similar reasons have had to also request, having to wait. So with that, I will now move the resolutions and adopt the Annual Report 2021 as shown on the screen. And we'll continue with Dr. Howe, which is item 2.7, which is the council response to the 2022 flood inquiry that has just concluded.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report provides Council's response to the independent flood inquiry chaired by Mary O'Kane and Mick Fuller and commissioned by the New South Wales Government to respond to the floods in early 2022. The independent inquiry made 28 recommendations for improved flood management in New South Wales. The report before you today recommends that Council support 16 of these recommendations in full and 12 in principle, with suggestions for further improvements. I also note that since the business paper was published, the New South Wales Parliament has legislated to establish the New South Wales Reconstruction Authority in response to recommendation 15. The Reconstruction Authority will focus on developing a state disaster mitigation plan and disaster adaptation plans for relevant areas of New South Wales. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Howe. Look, flooding is our most costly but also our most predictable natural disaster. And as outlined in the report, rather than seeking a new framework, implementation of the 2014 Productivity Commission findings into national disaster funding should be the focus, and correct the imbalance of spending, which is, according to the report, was 3% on mitigation and 97% on recovery. So with that, we will note the findings of the flood inquiry and we will provide feedback to a number of the relevant ministers in the New South Wales Government. And so we will also provide a copy of that submission to the Central Coast local members of the New South Wales team. So with that, I'm going to move those recommendations as shown on the screen. Thank you. Item 2.9, Dr. Howe, which is the draft Greater Warnervale Structure Plan, which I think we had the slides up previously on.
First slide, please. This report recommends that Council resolve to exhibit the draft Warnervale Structure Plan to provide opportunity for community to have input. Slide 2, please. The draft structure plan is required to support the desirable development pattern in and around Warnervale. This area is a priority as it's been growing strongly over the last 20 years and is identified in the Central Coast Regional Plan as providing around 1/3 of the housing required for the Central Coast to 2041. Next slide, please. The structure plan covers the localities bounded by Gillaby in the northwest, Charmhaven to the north and Wadalba to the south, and includes the Warnervale Village and Railway Station and the Wyong Employment Zone and Central Coast Airport. Next slide, please. There are 10 precincts identified in the draft structure plan that form the basis for future precinct-based rezoning and planning control investigations. Next slide, please. The draft plan responds to the New South Wales Government's Central Coast Regional Plan, which retains the Warnervale Railway Station in its current location. The structure plan contains 2 neighbourhood centres, one covering the current Warnervale Town Centre and the other in the vicinity of the proposed Warnervale Business Park and the current train station. The structure plan supports further investigation areas identified at Central Coast Airport in accordance with the draft Airport Master Plan, and proposes that Precinct 10 at Charm Haven West be developed predominantly for future employment uses. Next slide, please. The draft structure plan provides indicative staging with short-term development focused around the airport, the employment precinct and existing residential areas, with medium-term development at Charm Haven and Kungwall and expansion of housing in Wallara and Wangara expected to occur later. Next slide, please. The next steps in this process, should Council resolve to support the recommendations, are to publicly exhibit the draft in the first quarter of 2023 before bringing a further report back to Council that incorporates feedback from the community. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Houth. So just if you could answer, there was a question raised in the public comment, I think, about the road and the traffic. So you might, do you recall that? I think it's the link, that coordinator road, I think, was the question raised. Okay, we'll move on. With that, we'll move to adopt the resolutions that are shown on the screen. Cool. Okay. So, item 2.10, the outcome of exhibition of planning proposal related to 285 to 325 Pacific Highway, Lake Munmora. Alice, it's yours again.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Slide 1, please. This report deals with the proposed rezoning of land at 285 to 325 Pacific Highway, Lake Munmora. Next slide, please. This site is located on the northern side of the highway, west of Lake Munmora High School and across the road from Munmora Sports Ground. Next slide, please. The proposal aims to create around 300 residential lots with a minimum lot size of 450 square metres. It's accompanied by a planning agreement that provides for dedication of land, creation of a small park and a package of local road upgrade works. A site-specific development control plan chapter is also proposed to guide future development of the site. Next slide, please. The land is currently zoned RU6 transition. It's proposed to rezone it to R2 low density residential to support residential uses, along with RE1 public recreation and SP2 infrastructure and C2 environmental conservation. Next slide, please. Submissions were received both for and against the development. Key issues raised included traffic and biodiversity impacts, lack of services in the area, and inconsistencies with the greater Lake Munmora structure plan and general character of the area. The exhibited version of the proposal has been amended to extend the infrastructure zone for connecting roads and expand landscape buffers and pedestrian pathways. In relation to Ms Foster's concerns during the public forum about access via Chisholm Avenue and inconsistencies with the greater Lake Munmora structure plan, I can advise that the proposed location of the collector road in the structure plan was indicative and subject to further detailed studies. Those studies undertaken to inform the current planning proposal identified that the Deakin Avenue option would require relocation of high voltage power poles, as well as significant clearing of coastal wetlands and threatened species habitat, including the habitat of the swift parrot. Construction of the collector road off Chisholm Avenue enables lesser traffic congestion at Carter's Road and the Pacific Highway, and upgrades are proposed to Chisholm Avenue, including widening the roadway to a collector road standard, construction of a roundabout at the intersection between Tall Timbers Road and Chisholm Avenue, and construction of curb and guttering and pedestrian pathways. Next slide, please. The draft DCP site plan shows the indicative location of the proposed future collector road, local open space, conservation and drainage corridors and landscape treatments. Next slide, please. This is the last stage in the rezoning process. Should Council resolve to adopt the recommendations, Council officers will commence the process for the Central Coast Local Environmental Plan to be amended to reflect the proposed zoning changes. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. As you can see from that diagram, this is the last step in the process. I'm comfortable with the work that's gone on. I'm comfortable that all the questions that were raised during the consultation process have been addressed through the process. So with that confidence, I'm now going to move the recommendations for item 2.10 as shown on the screen. We'll move to item 2.11, which is the planning agreement for 188 to 222 Coney Road, Woongarra.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. The first slide identifies that this is a report seeking approval to vary a planning agreement for an approved development, which was approved to support around 167 residential lots. Next slide, please. Residential development was assessed under an earlier version of the Warnavale District Contribution Plan. Land dedications and work proposed to be delivered are no longer consistent with the broader infrastructure requirements for Warnavale. Next slide, please. The revised agreement provides for land dedication to contribute to open space and road widening, as well as construction and drainage works and road and cycleway works on and around.
Quiet, please.
Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. So I will now resolve to adopt the resolution that is shown on the screen. Thank you. Item 2.12, which is a request to prepare a planning proposal for 682A Coleridge Road, Batteau Bay. Dr. Howe again.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. This report seeks approval to prepare a planning proposal for 682A Coleridge Road, Batteau Bay. Next slide, please. The site is the location of the current Red Bus Services depot near the intersection of Coleridge Road and the Entrance Road. Next slide, please. The planning proposal will seek to rezone the site from SP2 infrastructure to R1 general residential and apply a minimum lot size of 450 square metres, a floor space ratio of 0.6 to 1 and a building height of 9.5 metres. Next slide, please. This would provide around 40 to 70 residential dwellings and include an additional permitted use of transport depot, which would allow the bus depot to remain operational for as long as possible. Next slide, please. This is the first step in the rezoning process. Should Council resolve to support the recommendation, the planning proposal would be submitted to the Department of Planning to commence the gateway process. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. Again, I think that's pretty straightforward and happy to support the resolutions the staff put forward. So I'll now resolve to adopt the resolutions that are shown on the screen. Item 2.41 is a standard report that comes up, which is variations to development standards. There's nothing untoward in that report. I'm happy just to resolve and adopt that report as shown on the screen. Item 2.15, which is biodiversity stewardship agreements in Blue Haven and Tumbiumbi. Now, this is about biodiversity credits and so on, and I thought it would be quite helpful for people in the gallery to actually understand a lot more about what these biodiversity credits is all about. So I've asked Dr. Howe, and I would appreciate it being quiet, I would like Dr. Howe just to explain a little bit about what biodiversity credits are.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. First slide, please. This report seeks a resolution of Council to enter into biodiversity stewardship agreements for two council reserves, one in Blue Haven and the other in Tumbiumbi, to improve their long-term protection. Next slide, please. A biodiversity stewardship agreement is a voluntary agreement between a landowner and the New South Wales Biodiversity Conservation Trust, which is a statutory body established under the Biodiversity Conservation Act. An agreement aims to protect and manage a site for its biodiversity values in perpetuity. It enables biodiversity credits to be created that reflect the biodiversity values on the site. These may then be sold to the trust, to a developer or to another party. And by entering into an agreement, the landowner agrees to manage the site in perpetuity to protect its biodiversity values. The income from the sale of credit is typically used to fund this maintenance activity. Next slide, please. The proposed stewardship agreement for Blue Haven wetland.
Just a moment, Dr. Howe. Just a moment, Dr. Howe.
Adjacent to Wallara Creek and West.
She's made the effort to get out of bed when she's ill to talk through this, and it just would be common courtesy for people to listen to it.
Next slide, please. The recommendation seeks council approval to delegate to the CEO authority to sign the two stewardship agreements and negotiate the sale of the biodiversity credits associated with those agreements. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
You are party to this, Dr. Television. You are discriminating. Will be named. It's on the public record. Public interest. Are you public or private? How much of this remains in public hands? You have been told. This is a farce. This is a colour of law. This is a pretense. From where do you derive your authority?
So, Dr. Howe, we're looking at item 2.16.
Mr. Administrator, would you like me to speak to item 216?
Yeah, 2.16. Yep.
The Davistown Wetlands Acquisition Fund report relates to a proposal to address constraints around the Davistown Wetlands Acquisition Fund. Next slide, please. The fund was established in 1996 for the purpose of purchasing privately owned wetland properties in Davistown and Saratoga, and currently holds around 1.4 million in an internally restricted reserve. Over the last 30 years, there have been numerous attempts to purchase property, and these negotiations have failed to reach agreement on a sale price. In April last year, Council resolved not to proceed with further negotiations. Council officers are now seeking direction from Council about what to do with the balance of the Davistown Wetlands Acquisition Fund. Next slide, please. The Central Coast Biodiversity Strategy adopted by Council in 2020 includes an action to establish a Central Coast Conservation Fund. In order to support conservation outcomes across the Central Coast, it's recommended that Council resolve to instruct staff to develop a draft policy to establish a Central Coast Conservation Fund and to consider incorporating the Davistown Wetlands Acquisition Fund within that broader fund. Any proposal to develop a citywide conservation fund would be subject to community input and adoption of such a fund, which would be subject to further consideration by Council. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. If we can have the resolutions up. Now, I am going to make some changes to these resolutions. After speaking with the Davistown Progress Association, I want to add into resolution number 3 in consultation with, in the first line, the Davistown Progress Association. So add Davistown Progress Association. And I want to add a new resolution number 6, which ensures that the expenditure of that acquisition fund on environmental is tied up in environmental management activities within Davistown be considered in the design of the Central Coast Conservation Fund policy. So that's a new addition. So with those additions, I am now going to move and pass those recommendations as shown on the screen. Item 2.13, which is acquisition of part of Lot 23, DP 7311090, Little Jillaby Road, for the Little Jillaby Bridge replacement. Mr. Bolgoff, you may have an opportunity to try and say something.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report is the administrative process to acquire land to construct a bridge along Little Jillaby Road, Little Jillaby. The current bridge is an old timber bridge and is being replaced with a new concrete bridge on a new alignment. There's approximately 410 square metres of land to be acquired. The acquisition and construction are funded by the Fixing Country Bridges grant funding from the New South Wales Government. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Yes, thank you. That's a great thing. We've got some funding to actually replace an old wooden bridge. So with that, I obviously support that, and I will now resolve to adopt those resolutions that are shown on the screen. We now move to item 2.8, which is the affordable housing update. And I believe Mr. Kennard is going to be speaking to that. Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. In 2018, Council undertook extensive research and engagement with the local community to develop an alternate and affordable housing strategy, which was adopted in 2019. As outlined within the strategy, there are no easy fixes, and solutions rely on all levels of government working together constructively with industry and the housing sector. And Council resolved to play a role in identifying ways we could add to the actual housing stock, in effect, bricks and mortar outcomes for the community. From this desire, the Council Alternate Housing Land Proposal concept was born, a process whereby current underutilised council land could be used to directly increase local affordable housing supply. Tonight, after extensive work over 12 months, it is proposed to partner with Pacific Link Housing on an affordable housing development in Ashton Avenue, the entrance. Pacific Link Housing are a local Tier 1 community housing provider. They may be local.
Continue, Mr. Kennard.
Pacific Link Housing are a local Tier 1 community housing provider. They may be local, but that belies their significance on the national stage. Their reputation is first class, and through the extensive procurement praises outlined in the Council report, they demonstrated their understanding of what is needed locally and convinced Council of their ability to deliver. The development aims to include between 40 to 50 dwellings in a mixed tenure model, incorporating a mix of configurations and bedroom types with an innovative design in keeping with the local character. It will also include some type of modern, accessible community facility to add to the existing public facility stock in the entrance area, and the overall development will be structured to ensure the long-term tenure of the site for Pacific Link Housing is guaranteed. Council is currently finalising an analysis of other underutilised land across the Central Coast that can be used for similar purposes as opportunities arise, and a further report will be presented to Council on the matter next year. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Hey, Mr. Kennard. Look, I think it's actually a great solution to actually have some affordable housing. We're talking potentially 40 to 55 dwellings for people who are desperate to get into their own property, and I think this is an opportunity for us to be able to help them. So with that, I'm very happy to endorse those resolutions and pass those resolutions as shown on the screen. Item 2.17 is support for the Koori Knockout 2023 tournament. Now, the Newcastle All Blacks have come to the Council requesting that we provide them some help in staging the 2023 51st New South Wales Aboriginal Rugby League Knockout at the Central Coast Regional Sporting and Recreation Complex in Tuggerah. I'm very happy to support this. When I was at the Inner West Council, we also hosted that same tournament, and it's just fantastic seeing the opportunities of some senior NRL players and international players actually mixing with and playing with very much amateur people from across the state. So to me it's a fabulous tournament, and I'm only too happy to be able to provide the support for the for the Newcastle All Blacks. Nearly said the New Zealand All Blacks then. Anyway, we'll move on from that. So with that, I'm happy to resolve the resolutions that are shown in item 2.17. Item 2.18, which is the Community Supports Grant Program. This is a standard program which we provide assistance to arrangement of clubs out there, and we're now allocating some $21,000, and I'll now resolve to adopt the resolutions as shown on the screen. So that's item 2.18, and that's done. We'll move to the Chain Valley Colliery Delta Coal Community Funding Grant Program, which is item 2.19. Now, that is a group that is calculated on the tonnes of coal that are processed there, and that sum of money is approximately $50,000, and we're proposing to allocate $29,000 of that to a number of projects and community groups. We're also agreeing to replace an allocation that was given to the Chain Valley Bay Boat Ramp Landing Deck, the sum of $28,000. We're happy to swap that to an upgrade of the playground at the rear of Chain Valley Bay Progress Hall, because the owner, which is the state, is causing issues with that particular boat ramp loading dock. So with that, I'm happy to resolve the resolution and get that money going to those very needy groups. So that's item 2.19. Item 2.20, Mr. Boris.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. So this report deals with the construction of fencing along St Hubert Island Bridge, and this project is in the current capital works plan. This fencing along the bridge is to prevent people jumping into water, which is due to safety reasons. The project is fully funded. The project is funded by a grant provided by the Australian Government. Tenders were requested, however, we did not receive any formal submissions. This report seeks endorsement to enter into negotiations with suitable suppliers with the view of entering into a contract to construct the fencing along St Hubert Islands Bridge. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you. Look, very definitely it's needed from a safety point of view, so again I'm very happy to pass the resolution as shown on the screen. We move to the last item, which is item 2.21, which is simply the setting the meeting dates for the next calendar year. We have to carry out a minimum, I think it's 10, is it not, council meetings in a year? We will be holding 12 next year. So with that, I'm very happy to move the resolution with those dates as shown there. And with that, we can close the meeting at 7:24 p.m. Thank you for your patience. All done.